Good morning. So today I thought what we would do is just walk through all the adjustments we've made so far for near final settle up. We'll get into a little bit of a review of the hold harmless provisions for the ADA hold harmless, and then talk about the actual adjustments that were made, including the ESER2 offset, and go through some examples to help you sort of reconcile those changes on your summary finance reports. And then we'll talk about the new preliminary SOF reports for 22. So this is where we'll start. We'll talk a little bit about the near final settle up, just in terms of generally the practice, right, is once we pass and the end of year, August 31st, beginning on 9/1, when we start doing near final settle up, we switch from that LP column to that DP or near final column. And so sort of the comparison of those two leaves a balance on your ledger, right? But the DPE column then will begin to reflect actual earnings. This year was a little more complicated process, so it's taken us a little bit longer than normal to incorporate settle up with the ADA hold harmless, but we've done several iterations and the majority of the changes are already incorporated in the summary, so we'll talk about what those are. We've incorporated the 2020 final certified property values, any tax collections that districts submitted through their tax information survey, all the transportation data from the route services report. We've pulled in your summer PEMS attendance data. We've done the ADA hold harmless adjustments, the ESER offsets. And then, and we'll talk about this later, anybody with additional days school year, that comes in through PEMS 4, so we'll pull in that data probably in November timeframe. When we go through all of these iterations, any districts with a positive balance left on their ledger, we've issued payments for those. They should be in your banks, if not by today, by first thing next week. Any districts who owe the state back, those negative balances, we standardly transfer to reduce earnings in the current year. So you'll find those balances all have been transferred to your 21-22 payment ledgers. What did this look like statewide? We transferred about 1.3 billion in negative balances, and those are all reducing earnings in the current year in school year 22. We made $314 million worth of payments to school districts. On the recapture side, recapture increase, and 481 million is due from recapture districts to the state, and we issued 32 million in refunds to some recapture districts. In terms of the total, the portion that was related to that ESER reduction, the ESER2 offset, 760 districts received an ESER2 offset, totaling 1.1 billion. So 1.1 billion of the 1.3 billion and 481 million-ish in recapture. That's all. There's a mix of 886 million in foundation and 222 million in recapture that totals that 1.1 billion. That's all related to the ESER adjustments that were made. And we'll go through all of that methodology here in a second, but that's basically what statewide the numbers look like. So just quickly review the hold harmless provisions, right? We've had this FAQ that's been up all year. We released information at different sort of time periods. So eligibility was done by set attendance periods based on first and second 6 weeks, the third 6 weeks, and then the fourth through the sixth 6 weeks of the second semester. We made sure no districts were going to lose money as a result of implementing the hold harmless, which was automatic for everyone. And there were attendance rate caps applied to the actual PEMS data as well. So we'll go through that methodology, but it's basically just a historical rate. And that only applied to the remote attendance portion. So again, eligibility by set attendance period, right? The first set that we talk about is the first and second 6 weeks, automatic for everyone. The second set, there were 2 ways to be eligible for the third 6 weeks hold harmless. Most districts sent us a signed attestation, meeting the requirements of providing on-campus instruction to students in the third 6 weeks. For those that weren't able to do that or didn't, there was an alternative way to meet that methodology using your 6-week on-campus participation rate versus the fall rate, and to be either higher than that rate or 90%. And then in the second semester for the 4th through the 6th 6 weeks, that's the third set that we talk about. And that all, the methodology there was just to be either 80% higher than your fall on-campus participation rate in your 6 weeks or 80%. We went through a series of calculations, and I'll go through those where you can find those for your district in a little bit, but essentially in the 6 weeks, all the eligible students, we went through a check to see were they on campus at least a third of the days in the 6 weeks. And this table just kind of goes through that calculation again. Then after we went through, all the iterations of actual attendance, capped attendance, and figuring out whether or not you're eligible for a hold harmless. In each of those attendance sets, we do another check that just makes sure no districts lose money as a result of implementing the hold harmless automatically. The next slide kind of illustrates how that could happen for a district. And there weren't very many districts, by the way, that this applied to, but remember that ADA was the trigger for the hold harmless. And so if the district's total capped ADA was less than their hold harmless ADA, right? We give you your hold harmless ADA and we replace all the FTEs, attendance-based FTEs along with that. There could be some cases where that difference in ADA wasn't that large, but the special populations, those FTEs for special ed or CTE, might have been higher in your actual PEIMS ADA, and therefore would actually generate more funding for the school district than doing that full replacement of the hold harmless ADA, because a lot of these generate higher weights. In terms of the attendance rate caps that were applied, we applied a historical rate. We figured out what your actual attendance rate was for the 21 school year and applied that to a historical rate from 1819. There's a spreadsheet out there for all districts that contain this information. And again, I'll step through some examples to show you folks where that information is. The on-campus ADA would be excluded from the rate cap reduction. And so this particular calculation would only apply to the remote portion of attendance. So we wouldn't be capping anyone's on-campus attendance. Again, I'll go through some examples of this, but basically in the middle portion of this chart, we go through an example where a district has 100 of their students serving remote instruction settings. Their attendance rate turns out to be 98%. In this example, we reduced their remote portion by 7.653% after we calculate the ratio to their overall ADA of this actual attendance rate, right? So it's really the delta between 98% and 96.5%. In the bottom example, there's no attendance reduction. Sorry, the remote reduction is not the actual 7.653, even though you still have 500 ADA and the same attendance rate applied. Will only reduce what would be calculated as 7.653 ADA from their remote portion. So here they're only getting a reduction of 5 because that's all the kids they served in that particular setting. Quick reminder on Comp Ed, we had a whole lot of questions about this. State Comp Ed, you were all provided a hold harmless, which was the better of 2020 or 2021. For almost all districts, 2020 was better. And we did that back in March, right? So your LPE payments were adjusted. We provided that. So in all of the hold harmless runs, you won't see any changes to Comp Ed. That hold harmless was provided prior. So it's already included in both the PEMS actuals and the hold harmless runs. It's baselined, if you will. Sort of after we get done with all of those decisions, right, then the last thing we do for districts who are eligible for a hold harmless is apply that ESSER offset, right? The state used federal funds to pay for the hold harmless. And so the mechanism that the state used to do that is to reduce refined ADA until we get to an amount equal to the hold harmless amount. Of course, we do a check to make sure you have ample ESSER funds to be able to do that check. So we wouldn't take, if you had a larger hold harmless and you had ESSER 2 allocation, we would only take and reduce the amount of the actual ESSER 2 allocation that you have, and the state would make up the difference. This is just mathematically how we accomplish that, right? So once we determine the amount of the hold harmless for certain districts, we look at how much their ESSER funding is, and then we ratchet down ADA until we get to an amount of the hold harmless or the amount of the ESSER grant itself. So in a nutshell, here's what we did at Settle Up. And again, we'll go through several examples here just to sort of solidify this for everyone. So the first thing that we did, and of course we're incorporating other elements like property values, et cetera. So this only speaks to the ADA hold harmless piece of the adjustments that we did at Settle Up. So the first thing we did was we pulled in and figured out what is every district's actual PEMS ADA. Then we applied that cap to the remote portion for those historical attendance rates. And then we compared that value, whether it was the actual or the cap PEMS ADA. And then we went through and compared to the ADA hold harmless by set attendance period. And then we did that check in step 4 to make sure no districts lose funding, right? If they got a hold harmless, but really they got more funding using cap PEMS, then we went, with those particular figures for those particular districts. And then for any districts who got a hold harmless, right, we determined the lesser of dollar amount for the ADA hold harmless versus ESSER 2. And for all of those districts, we reduced ADA to that amount. We refer to that as then an ESSER district, an ESSER 2 district. So you'll have non-ESSER districts and 760 ESSER districts, if you will, that received a hold harmless and therefore an ESSER offset. There's some tools that we've provided online to help you reconcile all of these changes on your summary of finance reports. One of them just went live yesterday. And so we're going to step through that worksheet. This file has been posted for quite a while. It shows you your PEMS ADA, your cap PEMS ADA, and all of your hold harmless ADA. This new worksheet actually shows you each run, what the run description was, and what ADA and FTEs were used to produce the amounts so that you can actually reconcile to your ledger. And of course, you have your payment ledgers and SOF reports. So let's go through some examples. So the first example, this is a non-ESSER district, and I tried to pick some Region 1 districts. So this particular example is La Jolla. They're not an ESSER, they're a non-ESSER district. They didn't get a hold harmless or an ESSER offset. And let's step through the data in the files so that you can kind of see how that reconciles out for them. So the first step is to look at actual PEMS ADA. So in columns D through F of this particular table, and hopefully everybody can see that okay. I know it's probably kind of small on the screen. We'll make the slides available so you can have a look at these particular examples after we finish today. But we take and we look at the in-person ADA, the remote ADA, that's both asynchronous and synchronous, to get that total PEMS, actual PEMS ADA. And then in columns G through I, what you're seeing happen is that attendance rate cap being applied, right? So in the case of La Jolla, their actual cap was 0.947, and their actual attendance rate was higher than that, 0.961 or 96.1%. And so they have a reduction factor of 0.985 that we apply to each six weeks attendance. So we apply 0.985 to 4145.038 in the first 6 weeks, and so on and so forth for each 6 weeks. Right, so in column K just shows you I times F, which is just the 88 times the reduction factor in terms of what we actually subtracted from column E, right? So they had plenty of ADA. In fact, most of their students were in a remote setting for the year. And so they got their full, the full cap was applied to the remote portion. So if there's a difference between K and L, it would just be because potentially they didn't serve that many remote students. And even if, it turned out their cap should be larger, we're only applying that to the remote portion. In column N, then you see their final capped ADA after we apply the reductions. And then the total in column O, so 24,393.172. This is their capped PIMS attendance data. Then in step 3, we start to look at that actual PIMS ADA, the capped ADA, versus the ADA hold harmless by set attendance periods. And so the first thing that we have to do, right, is go out and look, were they eligible, right? And so let's recall in the first 2 6-week periods, all districts are eligible for the hold harmless. In the third 6 weeks, again, signed attestations or that alternative methodology. That's how we determine the eligibility. So in column D, you'll see a check in the bottom table for whether or not they were eligible for each 6-week period. The table at the top here in blue is how we derive the second semester hold harmless participation rate, right? It shows in their 6 weeks that, they meet that third of the students on campus. They're at 39.6. So they're eligible for the second semester hold harmless. The students were there for more than a third of the 6 weeks. So this particular district is eligible for the hold harmless for all 6 weeks. Then in column E and F, what we're doing is just pulling in that cap PIMS, remember from the previous slide. And for the first 2 6 weeks, right, the methodology was that you get the average. So 4072.784 is just the average of their first 2 6 actual cap PIMS 88, 4082.280 and 4063.288. And that's what we're using in the first 2 6 weeks to compare to their hold harmless ADA. Again, that hold harmless ADA, there was a file posted last fall with everybody's hold harmless ADA and FTEs. Then in the third 6 weeks, again, we're just taking their actual cap PIMS ADA from column E and comparing it to their hold harmless ADA in column G. And by the way, the hold harmless ADA is just, the total number divided by 6, right, for each 6 weeks. So we can actually do comparison for every single 6 weeks. And then in the 4th through the 6 weeks, same thing. Taking their cap PIMS ADA and comparing it to their hold harmless ADA. In La Jolla's case, in every single instance, their cap PIMS ADA is actually higher than their hold harmless ADA. So this particular district, there's no need to do a hold harmless. We stop after step 3. They're not an ESSER district. They're not going to receive a hold harmless. Their cap PIMS is higher, and therefore there's no ESSER reduction. The other file that I talked about that was newly posted to the web page is helpful because you can see several things. So in the chart here in the table, you can see in column D, each run description for La Jolla. You see that actual PIMS ADA pull in, right? That's in column K, that 24,768,175. And then you see their cap PIMS, that's that 24,393,172 number we were talking about earlier. And then in the hold harmless, you see that doesn't change, right? They're still on cap PIMS 88, 24,393, 172. So they're better of is cap PIMS. They don't get any kind of hold harmless and therefore no ESSER reduction. Let's step through an example of a district who is an ESSER district, since this applies to most districts. So again, steps 1 and 2, this time pick Donna ISD for an example. Again, in columns D through F, you see their in-person, their remote, and their total PIMS ADA. And then you see their attendance rate cap was 94.9%. And their actual attendance rate was a little bit lower than their cap. It was 93.3%. And so there's no reduction to be applied here. In this case, you know, their attendance rate's lower than their cap. There's nothing to cap. So their final cap ADA is their actual PIMS ADA, 12,547,702. Then we go through step 3 for Donna. This again, we're looking at, were they eligible in the second semester? That's the top blue portion. Yes, they were. They were automatically eligible in the first and second 6 weeks, and they were also eligible in the third 6 week period. So in the bottom table, again, you see their cap PIMS ADA, which is their actual ADA, since they weren't actually capped. And then you see those same calculations that we talked through for La Jolla happening, their average of their first 2 6 weeks. We compare those in the first 2 6 weeks to their hold harmless, and then the third through the 6 weeks is just their actual PIMS versus their hold harmless ADA. In column I, you see in this case, for Donna, in every single case, their hold harmless ADA is higher than their actual PIMS ADA. So that gives them a hold harmless ADA of 13,032.285. So they move on to step 4, where we're actually going to look at, was that better for them than using their actuals? And in this case, yes, by quite a bit. And so if you look at Donna, they have more records, right, than La Jolla had in this particular other spreadsheet because they were included in the ESSER reduction run. And in column I, and let me point out, and so in column K, right, you see their actual PIMS and their cap PIMS are the same at 12,547.703 in column K there. You see their hold harmless ADA kick in, and then in the better of run, their hold harmless ADA was the better of 13,032.285. And then you see their ESSER reduction in the bottom line, 2,046,602. Presumably this is the amount, right, when they draw down their ESSER funds, essentially we cut those general fund expenses, and that's the hold harmless ESSER 2 offset amount. And then of course, all the FTEs and ADA that gets used along with the refined ADA appear in subsequent columns here. This is just cut off for purposes of putting it on the slide. So we still have some runs pending for near final. We've incorporated most things, including getting through the ADA hold harmless. We still have 104 districts pending final certification. I don't think it's ever been that large of their 2020 property values. So, you know, as we get the data, which I'm told maybe mid-October, even early November for those folks, we'll continue to incorporate that information. If any districts who have partnerships, on Senate Bill 1882 partnerships, but where they partner to operate a local charter, we'll be getting those updates in the next day or two. And then one thing that is still pending that we've now been able to switch gears and start focusing on is bond runs. So for any districts who get IFA or EA, allocations that are sitting on the ledgers are not correct. We've switched over to the VP column, which is just plain wrong. The first thing we're going to do is the ADA that we're going to use for IFA and EDA purposes for all the bond calculations is going to be from the better of run 33254. So that's either going to be hold harmless ADA or cap PIMS, whichever applies to a particular district. We'll incorporate those 2020 final values from districts we have it, tax collections from the tax survey. Sorry, it looks like I'm missing some words there, sorry. And then updated debt service through August 31st. We will have to recalculate and revise the EDA yield slightly too as we get this data incorporated into the run. I would expect, fingers crossed, we'll be doing that work by next week, if not already starting that work today. And then sometime in most likely November, again, the ADSI ADA for any districts who participated in additional days school year, ADA will be added back to your district for that particular from PEEM submission 4. So as soon as we get access to that data, we're going to have a look through it and get that attendance added back to districts who participated in that program. And then, of course, next April, pull in your final tax collections from your day one schedule of your AFR, any end of year services for special education, OSDP credit recovery districts, that attendance. And then the IBC and college prep reimbursements, we'll be doing that at final settle up. They're still working through what those final amounts are. So in the near final summary, you won't see any updates for those. Those will be done at final. And you know, I don't know if we want to stop here before we go in to talk about 22, or somebody want to go in the chat. Do we want to have a discussion, or do we want to just go through 22 and then open it up for Q&A?
Amy, I don't see any questions in the chat right now.
Let's keep going and think if you have questions about that, you know, your final settle up, happy to talk through those. But it's funny, my Alexa just started playing downstairs here. So sorry. Hopefully y'all don't hear a lot of loud noise in the background. The 22 preliminary summary finances reports are now all based on new law. So by Monday, you should have your first September payment. These reports, we incorporated the changes from the House Bill 1525, which include the tiered CTE FTEs. And just to be clear on that, we parsed out your actual attendance projection CTE estimates. We just parsed those into tiers. And then of course, you'll go through the process, like always, of reporting PEEM's data. And we'll pull in the actuals next September. The new fast growth methodology is also incorporated here, and there's some spreadsheets online if you want to look again through that methodology. But all of that should now be incorporated, as well as the GT enrollment. Now, one sort of note about that is that the GT enrollment and the tiered CTE FTEs, you're not going to be able to see that on your actual SOF reports. We're rolling out, it's in the bottom line calculations. You won't be able to see any detail about those figures until we get some subsequent changes made to our SOF reports. So you'll start to see changes on the main report soon, where you'll be able to see the GT and allotment actually appear, but it is part of the actual calculation. And then you'll also be able to go to your tier 1 detail at some point and see the tiered CTEs and the totals come through to that report. But right now, you're just going to be able to see the totals, the actual totals. And then, of course, something to keep an eye on every year is we annually calculate district payment classes. We need final values to do that, right? So because of the shift to current values, we can't really do that till right before your first September payments. But you can go out right at the top of your SOF, see your newly calculated payment class. For a lot of districts, that doesn't change, but for some districts, it does. And so just be aware of that. Should it apply to your district, could change, the way your actual cash flow in certain months, the percent that you're paid on a monthly basis.
Amy, we do have a couple of questions now.
It looks like somebody's asking where the spreadsheet is posted to reconcile the near final summary of finances. I will show you that. There's also a link in here, but it's on the main state funding page under state funding reports and data. And so I can actually, can you all see my screen? There should be a web browser up.
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you go to our main webpage and you hover over finance and grants and go to state funding, this first reports and data link, they're here. So the spreadsheet that kind of shows you the reductions, what the run names are, all the ADA and FTEs that were used in each run, that's here. And then that near final hold harmless ADA spreadsheet where you can actually walk through your actual PEMS data, your CAP PEMS, and your hold harmless ADA, that's all right here. These two links, right under state aid and student count data. Will there be 2 GT allotments? No, there's only going to be 1 GT allotment at the 0.7 weight.
Amy, there was also one about if the final one will include the IFA due to bond refundings.
Yes, for certain districts that sent their amendments in which we've processed. We have processed some amendments that haven't been yet incorporated, but there's also pending amendments. And so it just depends which category you fall in. Wendell McBride, our IFA and EDA analyst can help you understand, you know, once you see those runs, if you see the asterisk disappear off your IFA report, that means we've incorporated obviously those amendments. If not, they're still pending. But he's the guy to definitely follow up with, and we'll attempt to get all of that incorporated, you know, as quick as we can. We have made a lot of progress with amendments. Fantastic. So yes, if they're not there, get in contact with him. We'll make sure to get that information incorporated. All right. I think that's all the questions at the moment. Let's go back to 22, school year 22, and talk a little bit about what are we going to do in terms of timeline? And this is our standard timeline always for the summary finances reports. But, you know, so here we are, you know, back in June, we put up an initial report, which was, you know, pre-15 SB, HB 1525 law, tenants projections, estimates of DPV and tax collections times 1.84. We've since incorporated 1525 law, which we just spoke about. Then we rolled over final values times 1.84%. So some districts property value and tax collections changed as a result of those updates prior to the September payment being issued. We are working through NIFA application. So anybody who applied for a new facility instructional allotment, new instructional facilities allotment, that is backwards, sorry about that. Those we intend to incorporate by November. So if you applied for one of those and you're approved, you'll see that allotment pull into tier 1 by about November. And then I'm sure everybody remembers, and I have some slides after this where we'll talk through the local results of the local property value survey. This is where we're setting your tier 1 tax rates, maximum compressed tax rates for tier 1. And that actually data will not be incorporated into the SOF until later, January, February, when we receive all the preliminary property values, your self-reported total tax rates. And at that time, we'll also pull in your fall PEMS budgeted collections. So you submitted that data. There's a list out there. I'll show you in a slide or two, go through some of those results, and hopefully use those to adopt your tax rates. Then in September, we, of course, incorporated all those changes and made your first payment. November, we'll be calculating bond pay. After we finish settle up, we'll then switch gears to do a ledger analysis, roll balances, and initialize the bond calculations for 22 to make sure we get you bond payments hopefully by November. And then in December, you know, if not by November, and by December, we'll have those structural facility allotments rolled in. Again, January, February, this is that in March are the only really other times your LPV will change during the year. January, February is a big one. When we get the preliminary property values, all your self-reported tax rates, will pull in those MCRs that you gave us on a local property value survey. And your fall PM's budgeted tax collections. That's so that all of this data sort of syncs up together. And both, that'll be brought into both LP and DP. So at that time, your cash flow will change again. Then in March, of course, we're going to bring in your actual SCE counts, which were based on your fall PM's data. And then of course, aggregated and tiered. And then we don't really make many other changes that would affect cash flow anyway. You know, we'll continue to update DP and that sort of thing to give a look at what settle up might look like. But the next time your actual funding will change, then again, is next year at your final settle up. When we pull in that summer attendance data, transportation, tax collections, etc. So let's talk about the LPVS for a second. Again, I put a link in here, all the school districts' final MCRs that came out of the local property value survey. That list is published. Yeah, hopefully y'all, again, use those actual tier 1 rates to set your final tax rate, adding in any enrichment pennies to that. We had a great response rate. Almost all districts submitted their property value survey. For the 17 districts who didn't, they just received the lesser of state compression or the prior year compressed tax rate. There was about 16 districts that submitted appeals. This is for a variety of reasons. Sometimes their local appraisal district doesn't have their values yet, or there's some kind of strange discrepancy that we work through with folks who appeal their MCR. And then, this is all done under a very fast timeline, also a couple of weeks. And then 13 out of the 16 appeals were granted. And part of the reason a few of the appeals weren't granted is just related to a decision that their appeal doesn't change their MCR. There's really no reason to grant it. So as far as the Region 1 response, really good job. You all submitted your LPVSs to TEA for approval. So, and 3 out of the 4 appeals were granted again. Probably the one that wasn't, just didn't, their appeal didn't change their actual compressed tax rate. So statewide, what did we, what was local property value growth? About 6.8% according to the initial data that we got through that collection. And again, we'll be updating with actual values in January, February timeframe when we get those from the comptroller. The average MCR was about 0.8609, and of course the floor was 0.822, and the maximum compressed rate this year was 0.9134. Kind of just shows you the mix of districts there that were at the floor or at the maximum. And in terms of Region 1, actual local property value growth is actually more like 7% if you use sort of this percentage is based on like simple averages, but really it's more like 7% if you use the quotient of the sum methodology. So anyway, for what that's worth, y'all's local property value growth is really more like 7% as a region. Your average MCR tracked pretty closely with the state, and just a couple other statistics there. So MCRs by region, again, this just shows your average around the statewide average at 0.86. And then I just have a couple of examples here to just remind folks, we're collecting all of this information based on locally certified values we know will change when it comes to preliminary certification. And just a reminder that, there's no settle up for MCRs, but just remember that local tax compression, it doesn't impact your funding. It just changes the split between the local and the state share. And these two slides just contain a couple of theoretical examples. The first example, just being, their local property value survey showed 10% growth, but when we get the actual preliminary values next January, it'd be more like 7%. So, their MCR was a little lower than it maybe needed to be. Doesn't matter. The funding, just puts more into the local share and less into the state share as a result of doing that. But it doesn't change the bottom line entitlement. This is just the opposite example, an MCR that was a little bit lower, growth came in higher. So the local share is a little higher. And it turns out to be a little less when we pull in the actual values. And that's really all I have in terms of near final settle up, new year timelines and updates to the SOF reports, sort of where we are at today. I did include several links. And again, we'll get this presentation out to folks at Region 1 and have them post it for you. Lots of resources, just the same old files on the coronavirus webpage that help you through all the methodology for the hold harmless calculations, as well as the links I provided in the slides to the data we've posted on our state funding webpage. And there's a link to that webpage here. We've set up several email boxes for the division in an effort to try to get, we only have a limited amount of staff, but, sort of try to provide better customer service and get you answers rather than sending them just to one person, even though in most cases we have one person doing one or more things. But here are those email addresses for your use. This way we can have maybe more than one staff member monitoring these email boxes and get you some information. I am a little bit behind on our general inquiries box just due to volume, and trying to actually get the calculations done. So beg your patience, really appreciate it. If you can't get a hold of us in one of these ways, this is what our staff do. Here's their phone numbers. And of course, you can always contact me as well. David, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I did. Well, I created a little bit of a cheat sheet just for some topical things that are things that I continue to get questions on. It's not really well, I'll say it's not, it's more related to federal funds, but because they're accounting related, they fall back to me. And so, all right. So this is a little bit of a cheat sheet that I thought these were points that I wanted to talk about, and I thought a better way to do it is just to provide this document. So I started creating it of things that I wanted to make sure that we mentioned. So on the first one, number one, ESSER 2, to provide some clarification for you guys. So ESSER 2, like Amy said, is paying for part of the hold harmless for this year. And so there's been some questions that I've gotten about when to recognize that portion of ESSER 2. And so what we're saying is up until the amount that covers the hold harmless, that all can be recognized in fiscal year 21. So similar to what we said about ESSER 1 last year with 260, with Fund 266 replacing the hold harmless last year. Same thing for this year, same reasoning. And I've had conversations with several audit firms, so they'll be looking for this and they're aware of it. The 831s, it's a little easier, obviously, because you've had more time to get your NOGA, and so there wasn't necessarily a question about when your NOGA was awarded. But for the June 30s, I don't believe any June 30 had a NOGA awarded before their fiscal year end for ESSER 2. Therefore, because it is replacing or offsetting some of the state funds for the hold harmless, you guys can recognize that in fiscal year 21. And so you would record the revenue in 21, and then you would also record the expense for 21 in fund, in the ESSER fund. And then the second bullet point, or the second point I wanted to make sure that I clarify, is there seems to be some confusion on the PPRP and what the source of the reimbursement is. If y'all remember early on, so a year ago, we said that it was going to be coming from CRF Fund 277. And as time has gone on, there's been a shift in payments. Some of you may have seen payments from ESSER 1, so Fund 266. I think now if you're getting those PPRP reimbursements, it's showing ESSER 2, so 281. But I confirmed with Corey's shop that the allocations that you're receiving for the PPRP is not going to be from your specific ESSER 2 amount. That is, those reimbursements are coming from the state allocation. So we received a portion of ESSER 2 funds, and for the PPRP reimbursements, that's the funds that we're using. And I know that Romalda, you sent me an email yesterday, and I believe this question should help answer that. Happy to discuss more, and that's partly why I want to make sure that I was able to join, so that we could discuss your question versus what this bullet point is saying.
Marks, this is Romalda, and since you're touching on that, I think
Yep.
one of the questions was, what was the appropriate object code to utilize to record on the bulk purchase, not the PPRP?
Okay, so bulk purchase, it was coming from FEMA, which it should be coming, that should have flowed through, I'm sorry, the TDEM. So it would not be the typical federal fund that you're used to seeing, the 5929 from state agent, from TEA. It's coming from other state agencies other than TEA.
Okay, so then we need to record it as a 5939 because I'm
Yes.
still, okay, because this morning I received an email and the external auditors are advising the school district to record it as a 5929. So we just want to make sure that when we submit PIMs, there's no issues on any errors that we may encounter. So if that's the case, then I'm gonna advise the district back that based on recommendations from TEA, we should use 5939, correct?
Yes.
For that bulk purchase.
Yes. If it was from FEMA or from TDEM, then yes, that's the number you should use.
Okay, and this is the 50% TEA share of the entire bulk purchase that was made in the summer, fall of 2020, right? So this is to report 50% TEA's contribution.
For TEA or state contribution, because there was also your city county may have had some, TEA had some, I thought state had some, and then the school district had their own.
But this is the 50% that TEA paid Region 4 to handle the bulk.
Oh yeah, yeah. Put it as 5939.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I need
Hey,
another bullet
David,
point for that.
David,
Sure.
I had a quick question. I was looking at your point on ESSER 2 there. Doesn't ESSER 2 have the same pre-award period as all the other ESSERs? And if that's the case, why would the amount be limited to what they can spend in 21?
So they, because they didn't have an actual no-go awarded before their fiscal year end, we're only using the offset portion to that they can record in 21. And it's going to be the same answer for ESSER 3 in the third bullet point. Because there wasn't a no-go awarded before fiscal year end, even though they had awards, or they could go back as far as I think March of 2020. Because there's not a no-go awarded, there's not a contract, therefore they can't recognize the revenue for anything up until they get the no-go awarded. And that's more of an accounting limitation. I was trying to, especially on the ESSER 3 amounts, I was trying to find a way that we could recognize that before the no-go was awarded. But I couldn't get comfortable from the accounting side. I talked to a few different audit firms and tried to see their opinions about it. And in the end, we just couldn't get comfortable with awarding it that way. So they
Okay,
can
so just-
recognize it. They'll be able to recognize it in 22, or once their NOGA is awarded, they can
Okay.
recognize all of those costs. But so it may just be that instead of recognizing in 21, Josh, they can recognize it in 22, but still recognize all of those costs from a prior year.
So they can move the expenditure over to that fund? Is that
No,
what you're
so
saying?
yeah, so if you remember our discussion we had last December, and I'm saying you, but I think the broader context of myself and the state, we made a determination that you would recognize, and for this, if we wanted to use ESSER 3, say you had 100,000 in pre-award cost from March of 2020. And so the 100,000 in pre-award costs would still, you wouldn't move an expense into 282. You can't move an expense from a prior year into a current year. That was something that GASB didn't like. And so they would recognize a portion of that ESSER 3 amount of the reimbursement in 199. And then for their CFA, they would have a notation that some of their federal reimbursement was actually pre-award cost and ended up in Fund 199 and not in 282. So, and that's similar
Okay.
to what that's what we were saying last year in December as well, because of the timing difference. If y'all remember, one way we originally suggested was leaving the expense in that fund, recording the revenue in the federal fund, and then transferring it out. But GASB didn't like that approach either. So and if you go back and look at those slides that we created, it was a presentation that Roger and I did. The slides, and it's in the FAQ too, basically say record if the expenses are from a prior year, you record the revenue in the fund that actually incurred the expenses to reimburse that fund. And then you would just notate that on your CFA.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then my final bullet point, and I've had a couple of districts now reach out to me, I guess, as they're starting to look at the calculations for MOE and the MO equity, which is the Title I portion, that there's some concern about meeting both of those because of the amount of money that was put into 266 and 281. And so what we are saying is you can, for state compliance, you can combine Fund 199 with all the ESSER funds for testing state compliance on the special allotment. So comp ed, bilingual, CTE, early ed. So all of those that you may have spent some of the spending, the PIC codes in ESSER funds, we're going to combine with Fund 199 for state compliance. So if you move some of your comp ed cost over to 282, then when we look at compliance for spending, we're going to combine Fund 199 and 282 and pick 24 and see if you spent that portion of the you met the state requirements. And so that's only for the state compliance for the state picks. So for pick 23, pick 33, and then pick 43, those are your special ed picks, and then the dyslexia special ed pick. Those for state compliance, we will look at the spending in the ESSER funds. However, for federal compliance, so from James Conley's shop, they are still only considering 199. So you really need to be mindful about what you move into your ESSER funds, because you still have to comply with MOE and MO equity in order to meet the federal compliance guidelines for maintenance of effort. So that one's more of a cautionary tale, letting you know for state compliance, both 199 and ESSERs are going to be combined, but for the federal compliance calculations that you have to do, they are still only considering your state and local funds.
David, I got one more question. I'm sorry. So about that point, the compliance with the state spending requirement, I'm interpreting your parentheses there uses actual ADA for state revenue portion. Does that mean that whatever they would have earned under that allotment for the actual ADA, right? That's what the spending requirement is based on? Is that?
Yes. Yeah, we're not using the whole harmless adjustments for the state spending. We made a determination that because the actual ADA was the number of students that were at the, needed to be served from the schools, that we thought it was a more fair representation of that revenue portion. So yes, for you, you'll have to go back a few of the summary of finances to pick out that actual ADA amount.
Amy, which was that 209? Which number is that again? The actual ADA for folks?
Yeah, 33209. So because the cap team's run is 33211. But David, you're saying it's not with the remote cap, it's just the actuals, right?
Yeah, just the actuals.
Yeah. So 33209 is the run ID.
Thanks, John.
I have 2 chat questions. I'll see if I can stumble through them. So one is, we'll need to reclassify the expenses originally recorded in Fund 277 to Fund 281. Probably need more details. So if you want to shoot me an email or call me, we can talk about that. Because Fund 277 is also available for fiscal year 21. So that is a fund that's available. And if you're getting your CRF, then you can, the CRF reimbursement, then you can record it in 277. All right, Amy, now we're getting more questions. Let's see. No NOGA, but official allotments with pre-awarded dates. To clarify, we received our NOGA for ESSER 3 on June 24th, so technically allowed to record in fiscal year 21. Wow, congratulations, Adele. That is, you're right. If you received your NOGA on June 24th and your fiscal year is June 30th, then you can record expenses in fiscal year 21. And then I think Amy just may have responded to Edith on her question.
Marks, this is Romalda once again. I have a question. So on bullet 4, it says uses actual ADA for state revenue portion. I'm assuming that would also be applicable to FTE counts like in CTE and special ed for the state compliance.
Yeah, it's whatever your actual ADA is for those allotments is what we're using. Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Are there any questions from the group? Because I do have a couple of questions, but I want to give everyone the opportunity. Okay, I don't hear anyone. And so, David, since we in the fall of 2020 or around November, December, the district submitted the pupil projections, and we know that those may not necessarily be true and accurate what we're experiencing. And so will we have an opportunity to revise revenue projections, or they are what they are? And the reason I asked, let me continue with my statement. We did send out a survey a couple of weeks ago to our Region 1 school districts, And we were horrified with some of the numbers that came back. When we put that and we apply the basic allotment, we have a district that their difference is $30 million. And of course, everything is relative, but will we have an opportunity to revise those people allotments, or excuse me, projections, so that we don't have to receive money that we haven't earned?
Amy, do you, I'm not aware of any discussions of allowing the resubmission of pupil projections, but I
So,
don't,
yeah, I'll hop in here. We obviously don't want districts to get overpaid if the projections they made last December are way too high. Your superintendent can write a letter, sign it, explain to me, and send it to my email address, saying you want a downward adjustment. What you can't do is ask for an upward adjustment. We're pretty limited by statute through appropriation about, you know, any request for an upward adjustment, but a downward adjustment is doable with a letter. Asking us specifically what, is it refined 88 or reduced, CTE FTEs? If it's sped FTEs, you need to say what instructional setting exactly,
Okay.
to that you would want lowered. And just write me a letter and we can get your allotment reduced.
Okay, and this is only a Region 1 survey that we conducted through the center, but I do understand that Amanda Brownson also may have done a statewide already, so I would be interested to see those results. But we're monitoring, we're trying to get some data so that, of course, the budgets can be reflective of what it's really happening as far as student ADA is concerned, and FTEs, of course. Now, my other question is for 21, 22, and we all know all the challenges we encounter in the calculations at the school districts, and I can't even imagine what you went through to do the different runs. But for 21, 22, what should we expect? Are we back to normal? Your whatever 88 you report every, I guess whatever we report every 6 weeks, that's what we're gonna be using?
That's the guidance right now.
Okay.
I know Senate Bill 15 allowed some local remote options, you know, to
that's
try to
not-
address some of the things going on. Low attendance waivers, I think they're just monitoring that. Right now, we're using the historical rate to calculate those and would approve or deny. Yeah, I just think they're going to wait and see what happens, you know, before they decide if something additional is needed for this next school year. So right now, it'd be best to base everything on the students showing up and then use some of these other tools or mechanisms if it, you know, if it works for your district to be able to just maximize your attendance. I'm not sure what the right word here is, but yes, I would say be conservative, budget based on the kids who are showing up and your actual attendance. Again, you'll have those remote options potentially. So,
All right, since you
with subject to a cap and some other requirements, right? So,
since you mentioned waivers, we had a meeting, or we attended a meeting not too long ago, and maybe Josh, maybe you mentioned this at the rec meeting, but what we were told is that because of the low attendance, not to start submitting waivers at this moment, that TEA was going to be monitoring that data, and then they were going to issue guidance for maybe some changes coming up. So is that still the same? And Josh, I don't remember if you shared this at the rec meeting, but I heard that from someone.
yeah, for low attendance waivers, we've had some discussion within the agency, and like Amy said, we're monitoring it and keeping our eye on it and having some internal discussions on the low attendance waivers. I think Commissioner talked about it yesterday a little bit on the superintendent call. If any of you heard that, he talked around the low attendance waivers there as well. So it is something the agency is mindful of, and like Amy said, we're monitoring it and trying to gather some data that we're able to gather to be able to make a decision.
Thank
And
you.
just so folks are clear, right, this wouldn't help for low enrollment. right? I mean, that's not how the low, right? That's not how the waivers would function. Like your hold harmless did, right? That you had low
Right.
enrollment that boosted you up, or you got to use ESER 2 for that, I guess. The attendance waiver would just allow you, it would just function as it normally does, correct?
Yeah, it just
Okay.
basically removes the day from the calculation.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
All right, I don't see, there's another question. I don't know if you want us to send those, otherwise we'll be here all day.
Oh yeah, well, I see the question, but it's not a question that I'm gonna answer. Because it's one of those things that within the agency, we're having to think about and look at what is the rate that we should be using for the low attendance. So
All right,
that's partly why we're telling people hold off on submitting your low attendance waivers and let's see how things shake out.
okay. All right,
Hey,
then,
David, real quick, I'm sorry. I emailed a very similar question to the waivers group, and they essentially said that it would use the same rate as normal. And so you may want to circle back.
One
with that.
caveat to that, I saw an exact same email going from Amanda Brownson and waivers with this pretty much exact same question. The caveat is currently we're using the prior year rate like normal. But
Okay,
again, I think there's this, what we
You-
just
it's-
discussed
it's
in
under
terms
study.
of that could change. So
Yes,
hold
okay.
off on waivers probably.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
thank you so much on behalf of Region 1 for taking time to join us today.
Sure, thank you for having us.
Thank you.